Yes, it is possible to beat a more senior nurse out of a job. And the reason I know that this is true is I had a nurse complain to the union and HR to say that I stole a position that they should have been given. Here's the story of how it happened and what I learned as a result. So I was working in a PRM position on an inpatient child and adolescent mental health unit. And I was loving it. Honestly, the PRN life was for me. I was able to pick up all the shifts I wanted to. I was able to work exclusively evenings, which is what I wanted at the time. So things were nice. After 4 months of working on that unit, there was an opportunity to apply for a permanent position that would have a set rotation that was days and evenings. Now, as I mentioned, I was really enjoying evenings at the time, and I didn't really like the idea of having to work days. This line particularly had a stretch of 5 day shifts in a row, and that was not something that was appealing to me in the slightest. This was the very first time in my life that I ever experienced the proverbial fear of success. Up until that point, I always thought it was the weirdest thing ever that people would start achieving their dream, where they would start seeing what they wanted to actually have happen come to fruition, only to start feeling fearful. And so when this started happening, I started understanding that, okay, this is what that actually feels like. And I can now empathize with people who go through that. And as a result of that, I actually chose not to apply for the position initially. Now, the manager who was working at the time, her and I had a good relationship, and she was kind of like a mentor to me and really gave me some excellent career advice, including what I'm about to share with you. A few days before the position closed, she pulled me aside and said that she was surprised that she hadn't seen my name as one of the people who had applied. And I let her know the reasons why, same things I had mentioned to you guys earlier. And she gave me a phenomenal piece of advice that to this day still impacts my career in a powerful way. She said, sometimes you have to do what you don't want to necessarily do right now so you can do what you really want to do later on. And I sat with that for another day or so and ultimately decided to proceed with applying. And I had a pretty good feeling that if I did apply for the position, I was going to get it. And the reason for that is number one, I was getting really active in that unit already, even though I had only been there for 4 months. Number two, I have always been a strong interviewer, and I knew that I was going to prepare very well and give a excellent interview. So once I made the decision to apply, this is how seriously I took it. I dusted off all of my lecture notes and I went through them all over again. Well, the ones specific to mental health anyways. I went back to the textbook. I studied pharmacology, and I even went back to my NCLEX notes and textbook and redid all of my practice questions, reread all of my notes, and I also used the app that I was using at that time. We didn't have UWorld back in the day, but a similar app that allowed you to go through and answer questions on different areas that the NCLEX covered. I did all 150 practice questions for mental health multiple times. And so by the time that I got to the interview, I was feeling crazy confident. And on top of that, I dressed very well for this interview. I purposely chose an interview date that was on a day that I wasn't working because I wanted to make sure that mentally I was going to be at peace and I wasn't thinking about, oh, I got to get back to my shift after, or I'm working before or after this shift. I wanted to make sure that I was in peak mental condition. I also wanted to be able to dress extremely well. I'm going to get on my soapbox for just one moment here. If you are the type of person that wears scrubs to an interview, you ain't serious. I said what I said. I know some of you are going to get mad about that, but really think about this. If you dress the way that you normally dress every day to work, that is not how you're going to dress to impress. For guys, I recommend wearing a shirt and tie, or at least a blazer with no tie, or if you really want to go all out, a blazer with a tie. But I'll leave it up to you, but just don't wear scrubs. Dress nicer than you normally would. It is far better to be slightly overdressed than to be wearing scrubs or to be underdressed. I said what I said. So on the day of the interview, I was ready and I was locked in, and I knew that I was killing it as the questions were going on. I was able to answer everything confidently. And when they got to the behavioral descriptive interview questions, I kind of just chuckled because I knew what they were going to ask me ahead of time. They're always going to ask a question about conflict. They're always going to ask something about teamwork, initiative, or problem solving. And I had prepared for all of those questions. So I was locked in. And funny enough, one of the questions they asked me was, how did you prepare for this interview? And I said, I prepared for it the same way I did my NCLEX. And I went through all the things that I did. And the response was, I can tell. So I knew I was killing it. And of course, I also still had references, even though I was working on that unit at that time. And so they could see my work ethic easily. I made sure that I had two other references that were going to be able to speak to who I was, my potential growth as a nurse, and everything great about me, frankly. And so I wasn't surprised at all when a few days later, the manager called me and offered me the position. Now, this is where the story starts to get interesting. The following day, before the position was going to be announced that it was going to me, the manager let me know that the more senior nurse who had also applied for this position was actually going to file a grievance with the union to say that I was underqualified for the position and that the manager did not follow proper hiring procedure. Now, I had no idea what it meant to file a grievance. I was still pretty new to this whole nursing thing. I didn't understand what that meant in terms of what the union will do in a situation like that. But for anybody who doesn't know, essentially HR and the union will both look at both interview scores of the person who filed the grievance and the person who was the successful candidate. And if they determine that there was any foul play or that this person indeed is not qualified after they look at the resume, they will actually take the position from the person and give both parties an opportunity to interview again with a different set of interviewers. I can see why this nurse was mad and why her ego was so bruised because she had 4 years of experience on me. I was only on that unit for 4 months at that time. But this is the thing. This nurse, based on the way that she practiced, I knew she was the type of person that kind of took things for granted. And interestingly enough, we did interview on the same day. I came in. She specifically requested to do her interview on a day that she was working so that she didn't have to come in on a day that she was off, which I get in terms of work life balance. But she had to do the interview on her break. And for me personally, as I mentioned earlier, I knew I wouldn't be mentally locked in if that was the case. The other interesting thing is she wore leggings to the interview because that's what she was wearing on the unit, which actually wasn't in alignment with the dress code, even. At the end of the day, it really does make a difference the way that you present yourself and your preparation, because that's how I ultimately beat out this nurse and stole the position from her when she had 4 years of experience on me. Now, imagine the shame and the embarrassment that you would feel if you went to complain to HR because you lost a position to somebody who had only 4 months of experience when you had 4 years. You then proceeded to file this grievance only for HR and the union to say that no, this person that has 4 months of experience destroyed you on the interview, and your seniority only comes into play if the scores are within 10 points of each other. While the interviews in my organization at the time, at least, were scored on 75. So imagine losing by more than 10 points when it's scored on 75. I mean, I probably got dang near perfect score, but imagine how much worse you would have to perform to have your seniority not count in a situation like that. Oof, the ego blow. Honestly, if that were me, I would just shrivel up. I would probably just leave the unit. But I would have never filed the grievance in the first place. I would have just taken that as an opportunity to learn. But ego is a scary, scary thing. As I'm sure you can imagine, this nurse became one of my greatest ops on the unit after that, as did all of her friends. And it was beef for years to come until she ultimately ended up leaving the unit. There are three things I want you to take from this story that will help you understand why it was that I had such a stellar interview performance so that you can do the same thing and trounce these nurses that are entitled and think that the position should just go to them because of seniority. Number one, preparation and hard work will always beat experience when experience does not work hard. As I said, I took preparing for this interview as seriously as I did writing my NCLEX, and I definitely mean that. I'm not capping in any way, shape, or form. And it showed, as the interviewer said when I was going through and answering that question about how I prepared for the interview. Secondly, I took the opportunity to interview very seriously, which is why I was willing to come in on my day off and why I dressed to impress. Lastly, the way that I went about preparing for the interview is something that the average person is not going to do. I took the time to anticipate the questions ahead of time. I recorded myself answering those questions so I could hear myself and watch myself as I answer questions when I was under pressure. I was able to see all the weird nervous mannerisms I do. I was able to hear how many times I said like, and awe, and all these annoying filler words. And I also made sure that I made use of the STARS method to answer behavioral descriptive interview questions. And that's where the sponsor for today's video comes into play, which is my upcoming masterclass entitled How to Slay Your Next Nursing Interview. I'm also going to be going in depth into how I use the STARS method to prepare for and perform during my interviews so that I leave a phenomenal impression on the interviewers. So click the link in the description and secure your seat today. Alternatively, you can watch this video right here to see a full breakdown of the STARS method and how it'll help you land your next job. Don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and send this video to somebody else who needs to hear this.